Hey folks, Ted from Immersion here, and this is going to be a different kind of video. I'm not really sure how it's going to do. I don't think it's going to do particularly well analytics-wise, but a lot of you requested that I do it. So a while ago on social media, and more specifically here on YouTube, a community post where I listed out all of my characters in 5th edition. And the reason I did that is over time, people have asked, why do you say this is your favorite class? Why do you say this is your favorite race? Or so on. And, I put out this list, frankly, to say, look, I haven't really played that much in 5th edition. It's been out for 6 years at this point. I've only played a handful of times. And I wanted to just showcase that list and also to showcase who I played and what characters I played. So I don't really have knowledge. Some of the comments and things I make are purely based on what I've seen other players experience or my general understanding of the game and how things fit into the greater scheme of balance. So I want to jump over to YouTube to show you that list. And then there were some folks that were asking, can we get insight into these characters, their creation, what made them special, unique, and that kind of a thing? And again, not really something I thought I would be doing, but here we are. So I zoomed in here on YouTube, and you can see here's my list, and I have a running list. I have basically the name, the race, the class, what level the campaign started at, the name of the campaign, and then kind of the status of that campaign as it stands. So I guess we'll start. You've seen I kind of did I think I did a build. My Blues Brothers Paladin build was on Laranthir, my half-elf Paladin character. So when it came to, this was back in 2014, basically the fall of 2014 when Hoard of the Dragon Queen first released. I decided that, we should run it, and one of my friends who I've been playing with for a long time that I'd ran several campaigns, long-running, multiple-year campaigns for, and I'm still actually doing that for him now. 5th edition, it came out. I'm like, man, I'm so excited. I would love to play 5th edition for a chance. And he's like, well, I could take a chance at running it, but I don't really know anything about it. And I said, well, here's a good thing. There's a pre-written campaign coming out, and you could just run that. And that was Hoard of the Dragon Queen. So we got a group of our friends together, and we said, we're going to make characters, and it'll be fun. And he said, I'm really worried about getting started. I've never done this before. Maybe you should run a game so that I can see how it's done. And I was like, well, why don't you run a game so you can learn how to do it? And I was actually looking through, and my favorite 2 classes from 3.5 were the Ranger and the Druid. And I liked both of them because they got animal companions. And Druid was one of my favorites because of all the cool things it could do. So I was reading through all the classes to see which one I liked. Druid didn't really appeal to me, and I could clearly see, even at the time, that Ranger was struggling. So I was reading through, and I always liked the concept of a Paladin back in 3.5, but it was very different, a different animal as far as what it could do, and it was it needed a little bit of help. Again, powerful, but I didn't like the way it was handled. And I read through it here in 5th edition. I was like, man, I can get the divine connection that I want with my character, and it's also super powerful. I really like the looks of this. And I was like, okay, and I was reading through, and we're going to be playing Hoard of the Dragon Queen, so I was like, oh, maybe I'll be a Dragonborn, right? And I'll be a Dragonborn Paladin of Bahamut, and then that'll make sense why I want to fight Tiamat. It'll be a whole thing. And then I was reading through the Dragonborn, and I was like, huh. I read through the Half-Elf, and I read through the Dragonborn, and I said, man, Half-Elf is better than Dragonborn in every single way. And these, again, are early thoughts that I had in the couple months that the game had come out. I made the realization that I didn't like the way the Ranger was handled or the Dragonborn. So I said, forget Dragonborn, I'll be a Half-Elf instead, and then I'll be a Half-Elf Paladin, and that'll give me decent ability scores. And again, remember, this was very early on. This is all I have as a frame of reference is 3.5. People don't really do role-playing really at this point. Things like Critical Role and that kind of stuff don't exist. That's not a frame of reference for people. So I'm used to min-maxing from 3.5. So I said, well, let me try to do that for this, this character. And I ended up kind of making the ranger that I wanted, but as a paladin. I was a paladin of Mialiki, goddess of the forest. I was Oath of the Ancients paladin. I took the Outlander background, and I kind of built this character to sort of be a ranger without actually taking the class and as a paladin. So again, we started at level 1, and we played through Horde of the Dragon Queen, and then we started going into Rise of Tiamat as well. So I was an Oath of the Ancients paladin that was very useful for dealing with the enemy spellcasters. My ability scores, I rolled very well for my character as well, so that didn't help, that didn't hurt. I got adamantine plate mail pretty early on. And again, I used the whole Outlander background and built a whole story around this character about how we grew up in the woods, and we actually built a story, the DM and I, that the Green Dragon Worm Speaker in Horde of the Dragon Queen Rise of Tiamat was actually my mom, my character's mom. So that was a cool thing that I had going on with that, with that. So that was neat. And eventually, I took levels in Lore Bard because I recognized that our Cleric never healed anybody. And I was a healer as the Paladin, but bonus action healing would be nice. So I took levels of Lore Bard to get extra spell slots for smiting, as well as bonus action healing with Healing Word. And being a Lore Bard let me have a ton of skills because we didn't have a rogue, so I could handle most things. And that was kind of the backstory behind that character. Again, we ended the campaign, I think, at level 16. We always talked about going back and doing like one more like final hurrah to like round out, give true closure, even though we finished the campaign and we've just never done that. So that was a campaign that I didn't play weekly. It was kind of when my friends would come in from out of town, they'd all come to my house and they'd get in on a Friday night. We'd play on a Saturday. And, we'd hang out and get breakfast and we'd be drinking and playing a game. So it was long sessions, but infrequently. And we completed that back in 2015. Also, in like 2015, 2016, I decided I was missing D&D in my life because we completed our other campaign. And I wanted to try my hand at organized play. So I was going to go to a local game shop. And I was going to try Adventurers League. And I remember I showed up with like 3 different characters because I didn't know. I built my character completely Adventure League legal because I read all the rules and I built the different characters that way. I really wanted to play a monk at the time. But when I sat down at my table, there was somebody brand new who'd never played D&D before, and she wanted to play a monk. So I said, all right, I'll just be a bard then. Lo and behold, the next session, that girl never showed up again. And I decided, it looked like I could be good as a healer, but my DM in that didn't know what Adventure League was. He was an old, like, 1st, 2nd edition DM, and he just kind of ran his own game. And then I learned that everybody else rolled stats or had made up numbers for stats, and he was just giving out crazy magic items. And it was an interesting experience to play that, but I actually met some good friends who I play with pretty much now every week from that game. So that character, I ended up choosing to be a healer. I was a Lore Bard, similar to my Paladin multi-class. And I took a level of Life Cleric because I recognized between the spells I could prepare with Life Cleric that could make things a little easier for my spells known for Bard. And then I could use the extra healing that the Life Cleric gets when I choose to heal the party. And this character was, I think, he was a charlatan or a criminal, I can't remember. But basically, his name was Rick, but I basically made him Rick from the TV show Pawn Stars. So, like, owned a pawn shop, was a savvy businessman, that kind of thing. And I built the whole backstory. Again, it never came up because we only showed up every week and had a couple hours to play, and then we left. And then again, that was my first Adventure League character, and then eventually I stopped going to the shop and started running my own campaign and brought my friends that I made at the shop into my, my weekly. We made a new weekly session to try to I was like, hey, let me show you what D&D is supposed to be, not this weird hybrid thing. Like, that DM gave me a loot as my bard character that gave me a plus 20 to performance checks, or I could have sold it for 25,000 gold at level 3. So clearly, you know what I did. All right, then moving on to my next character on the list here. We'll jump back over here to the list to show you. Was Axton Fletcher, my human. Started off as a fighter. So this was for some friends of mine I knew from back in the Guild Wars 2 days. You may actually know him now as Kugo the Mighty. He was like, hey, I want to start playing D&D. What do you think about getting a chance to play? We talked before, and I know you never really get a chance to play. You're always DMing. Someone else wants to take the reins as a DM. We'd love to have you as a player. And me, as you kind of know if you know me at this point, I said, well, I want to be the rogue, right? I've never gotten a chance to play a rogue. I always wanted to do it. Lo and behold, there's a rogue in the party already. All right, well, what do we got? We've got a rogue. We've got a druid. We've got a paladin. Okay, starting at level 1. And I was like, I started building up a backstory. And for some reason at this point in my life is where I really fell in love with the concept of mauls, two-handed hammers. Whether that was because of, I don't really know why, but I really liked the concept of that. That's like when it clicked in my head that that's what I wanted for my character. And I said, I'm going to be a life cleric so that I can heal everybody. I'll be the healer. That way the paladin can focus on damage and the druid can do damage and I'll be the healer. Obviously the rogue will be DPS too. So I said, all right, let me be the life cleric, but I was like, I really want to use a maul. And if you know, life clerics don't get proficiency with martial weapons. So I said, what I'll do is I'll start off as a fighter. That way I get the proficiency and I'll get straight, constitution proficiency for concentration checks. And then I'll multi-class into cleric later. Well, we played like the first 2 or 3 sessions where I was a fighter. No one took any damage. We just destroyed stuff. And I was like, oh man, we don't really need a healer. I don't need to be like a dedicated healer. I can still be a cleric. I'll still go through my path that I wanted. I'll be a Tempest cleric instead. And then I was like, that's kind of a bummer because Tempest cleric gets proficiency with martial weapons anyway. So whatever, it's fine. If you saw my Eldritch Tempest build, that was my character Axton Fletcher from that. He is the one I built for this. So I started off as a fighter, and I was the only character in that campaign that actually wrote a backstory. So I built this big long backstory about, I had this cool thing where he got struck by lightning, so he had like lightning scar tattoos, which if you've never seen what a lightning scar tattoo looks like, they're actually, it must suck to get struck by lightning, but it actually looks really cool, like it follows the veins. It's pretty neat. So I built the whole backstory about how his dad was like a great weaponsmith, and he built this like legendary hammer, and like it drew the ire of a warlord who eventually like had fallen, but he killed his dad in the process, and his mom had like prayed for him and stuff for when he got struck by lightning. So she was a cleric or like an acolyte of Tymora, who is my favorite. Aside from Mialiki, my favorite god in all of like the Forgotten Realms. So I love Tymora. So that's where I built into that story. And I built this big long backstory about this character. And that actually drove the whole like campaign because we ended up fighting, like this guy came back from the dead, this warlord is like a lich, and we ended up having to fight him, which is pretty cool. And then, I ended up choosing to go Tempest cleric as opposed to fighter. Or as opposed to life cleric. And then as I was going along, I started to recognize like, I could do some decent damage with this hammer. And then eventually Sword Coast Adventure Guide came out, and I was like, hey, wait a minute, if I take a 3rd level into fighter, I can get Booming Blade, and then I could do a ton of damage with my hammer. So that's kind of where that build started to happen naturally. And then I was like, let me eventually take Lucky, right? So that I can tap into this whole Tymora luck goddess thing. The campaign didn't end up running that long. And the stream just kind of ended, the game that was on. Those exist somewhere on YouTube. It's called Roll for Roll. You can see it. I play in that. That campaign eventually ended. Then I was running, again, that kind of ongoing game for my friends I had told you about. That I was running on Tuesdays after the game I had in the shop ended. And one of my players who I was playing with every week said, hey, let me try running a game. We'll do it as like a follower goal on Twitch. Back when we got like 50 followers on Twitch, we were going to start doing this. And he's like, but I think it'd be fun to do a high level campaign. We're going to start at level 14. It's a big deal, right? No one really at that point had played a game. You know, mine at the end of Rise of Tiamat was kind of just like, just kind of those last couple levels just sort of happened real quick. So he said, let's run a game at level 14. And at this point, Matt Mercer had just released the Blood Hunter class. And I was like, oh man, that's so cool. It's a new class. I want to play this because it's something different. So I was trying to build a character. And in that campaign that we were playing through every Tuesday night that they were playing in, I had introduced a character known as Paladin Paine, and he was pretty much like a hard ass and a town guard. He originally really hated the party because of something one of them had done, and then he kind of grew to be like a begrudging friend NPC. And I had built a whole backstory that they didn't eventually learned a little bit about. But this character, Gregor Paine, was actually his brother, his younger brother, who, you know, Paladin Paine thought had died, a whole thing. And I had him stolen by a hag. And then I had given him the Profane Soul Blood Hunter, so he had a little bit of like spell casting. I ended up going with the Undying, the one that lets you get hit points when you kill someone, because I thought that would be a pretty good ability, but the other kind of abilities sucked. So I went with Variant Human so I could get decent stats, and I had, I built up this whole story about how he was captured by the hag, and he accepted the hag's kind of abilities to be a Profane Soul Blood Hunter so that he could use those to fight back and prevent anybody else from being captured by these kind of things. So he was a very big, he was a super hard ass, and he talked kind of like, Christopher Nolan, Christian Bale Batman. But he really did have a good heart, and he was out there to try to protect the innocents as best he could. And on sort of the first mission we were going to this castle to try to stop some like really, it turns out that Ilmater, the god, was captured and like turned into human form and being tormented by these bad guys, this pit fiend. There's a whole big thing. So we were going to fight this guy, and it was getting sucked into like the 9 hells and this, or like some form of hell, and this demon's getting pulled in, and it's trying to grab the party members and pull them in. And, Gregor, being the good guy that he is, he had actually, I think, died. I'd taken enough damage to take me to 0 hit points and basically kill me. I was unconscious, but like through Ilmater's might, like everybody was given like some temporary hit points that like allowed you to still continue to fight. You were still basically unconscious and dying, but it allowed you to keep fighting. That was like a mechanic that the DM had put in. So I decided, like, forget this, I'll save everybody else. I'm going to take my sword and I'm going to dive in and stab this thing and take it into hell, and like end of my character. But I technically killed it, and therefore, because of the Profane Soul, when you kill something, you get hit points back. So then I actually lived, and then I was trapped in hell with this thing. And that was actually kind of the storyline we were playing through. The party, I had built a whole new character, a rogue, that I finally got a chance to play. Super excited. And it was like around my birthday, and the DM's like, okay, well, we played through like an intro mission where my character was watching the other characters like in hell, and then the DM pulled a switcheroo on me, and then I ended up playing my character, my Bloodhunter character, that was trapped in hell. And that was basically how that campaign was going. The party came to try and break me out of hell. Well, we're trapped in Carceri, which is at least in, I don't know if this is actual lore, but this is the lore in our game. You can't open portals there, so you can't like use certain spells that let you open portals, and we couldn't easily plane shift out. So long story short, we were trying to get like my gear back because I'd been tormented for what seemed like, I don't know if it was centuries or decades down there, when it wasn't very long up on the surface. but I had been tormented, and we eventually like snuck through the castle, and I managed to get some of my gear back. And we were traveling through the desert trying to make our way out while this thing was following us. And the game just sort of died, right? So this ended back in like 2017. So at that point, we had started doing Curse of Strahd as well. And Jake, who was running Jake Game, was also running Curse of Strahd. So typically, if we had the opportunity to play one or the other, we played Curse of Strahd because it was ongoing campaign and we wanted to finish it. Also in 2017, I had my first child, which allowed us to not do what we typically did, which was play on Sundays to play. We used to like go, everybody used to come up, we used to go get breakfast, and we used to play for a few hours on Sunday. And it wasn't a big deal because my wife could just go out shopping and do whatever she wanted. But then when we had a kid, then it was balancing dealing with a kid as well, especially like during the day on Sunday. So that, unfortunately, that campaign has been on hold for over 3 years. Technically, I guess you could consider it still ongoing, but I don't. We managed to level up 2 levels, and he's a blood hunter. And obviously, it's interesting because the blood hunter has been completely revamped since then. Matt Mercer released his 2020 version of the blood hunter. So I have since updated that character to be the new blood hunter in hopes that someday we'll get a chance to play it, and I'll get to see what that was about. All right, moving down the list. And by the way, if you've made it this far and haven't figured this out, there will be timestamps in the description, as well as chapters for you to skip ahead if you're interested in a specific character. So next up was a Goblin Monk. So what happened, that ongoing Tuesday game I was telling you about, it ended very unexpectedly in a TPK. And that really shook me because I'd never killed characters before. And it really kind of like threw me off guard, and I had this whole plan, and I've been building up this big campaign and like the final fight for a long time. The players basically just avoided the fight for almost 2 years. And then all of a sudden they decided, hey, let's get on track and go do the missions. And then somebody did something else, screwed it up, and then the party ended up TPKing. So I said, hey guys, before I roll into doing another campaign, I'd really like to take a break. I think I want to try to design my own homebrew world. I think that'd be really fun. I've never done that before. But I don't want to stop playing. So maybe we can take a break. Somebody else can run a game, and then I can focus on the homebrew stuff. That way I don't have to plan out sessions. So my friend Sean, who had ran the Tyranny of Dragons campaign back at the beginning, back in like 2014, 2015, said, hey, it's been a few years. I've learned a little bit about DMing. Maybe I'll run a game. And at this point, Out of the Abyss had just come out. So we said, well, let's play Out of the Abyss. And also, Volo's Guide to Monsters had come out. So this is probably not just when Out of the Abyss came out, but Volo's Guide was out as well, adding new races. So we said, all right, well, how are we going to determine this? Everybody looked at Yuan-ti and we're like, man, that's really good. Immunity to poison. How are we going to handle that? So Sean came up with a new idea. He said, he built like an updated resurrection table, reincarnation table, because Sean loves random rolls. And he said, well, I'm not going to let you pick. You're not going to get to pick your race. Why don't we roll on the reincarnation table? Everybody can roll twice, and then based on what you get, that's the race you have to be. And then you can, start there and then build your class. So I rolled human and goblin. And I was just like, oh, these both work. I think I want to be a monk. I haven't gotten a chance to do that, and I'd like to try 5th edition monk. So I'm not sure which monk I want to be. Originally, I was going to start off as the shadow monk, because I said, oh, that'll be good. I'll be in the Underdark. There's shadows there. And then I found a homebrew called the Sacred Fist Monk, which was an old prestige class back in 3.5, where you were basically a monk cleric. And I was like, oh, the backstory of my character would be really good to be that. And then like the next week, they released the Unearthed Arcana for the monk leading up to Xanathar's Guide being published, and that had the Tranquility Monk. So that is how I developed Droop, my Goblin Tranquility Monk. So the story behind Droop is, for those of you who are familiar with Lost Minds of Phandelver, you'll know the Goblin character Droop is in there. And in that ongoing Tuesday game that we had discussed, where the party ended in a TPK, they had taken Droop out of there and basically adopted him. And in my story, I made Droop like an amazing woodworker. I don't remember why. I think that was to help out the one family in Phandalin that had like the woodworking like husband was killed and fed to the Nothic. I guess spoiler alert for a 6-year-old adventure. So I had made Droop like a master woodworker, and he was basically like not like your stereotypical goblin. He was like super nice. They loved him, and they like this was like a character, an NPC that they continued to visit consistently. And this character, Droop, that I was playing was Droop, son of Droop. So he was his son, and the two characters that had provided such a heavy influence into his life were a Cleric and a Paladin. So that's where the Sacred Fist concept had come from. And I had Droop was basically raised by his father, and then those characters had gone missing, right? Because they TPK'd and no one knew where they were. So Droop's mission, he was going to try and find them, and the only place he hadn't looked was the Underdark, and hence Out of the Abyss. So that was Droop. Next up, we had finished, and that was a campaign that we had completed, right? We started it, I think, in 2016 maybe, and we finished it in 2017, or we finished it, it was like 23 sessions we finished that game. I think it actually did start in 2016 and went into 2017. And then I was like, you know what, guys, I still don't feel like I have enough done on my homebrew world to start it. Does anybody else want to run it? And one of the guys we played with, Pat, had been like, he become a really big fan of Storm King's Thunder. And he's like, I want to run Storm King's Thunder for you guys. So we said, all right, Pat, we'll give you a shot. Everybody's getting a chance in the DM chair. You go for it. So at this point, it was, again, all of the Unearthed Arcana was coming out for Xanathar's Guide for the playtest. And I really, really loved the Hexblade class back in 3.5, and they made a Hexblade Warlock. And I was like, oh, I never played a Warlock. Let me do the Hexblade. So that is what I decided. And if you remember, Hexblade in the UA was a little bit different than the final version's better in every way. So I made a half-elf, shocker, because of how good they are. I guess I should have said that Rick was a half-elf. I forgot about that. But I made another half-elf, and he had a backstory all about how he was half-drow. So I went with the half-drow variant class from Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. So he had fairy fire, dancing lights, as opposed to the skill proficiencies. And I made a whole story about how, a whole backstory about, it was something about how he was raised kind of with the drow, and they treated him obviously very poorly. 1, because he was a male. 2, because he was a half-elf. And that's kind of drow society. And he eventually escaped because he had embraced the concept of becoming a warlock and forging a bond with a weapon, Hexblade, right? And then that is what allowed him to surprise his family and his captors and escape. And, it originally had started, some of the party couldn't make it on that random Tuesday. So Pat was like, oh, let me run it for you because we don't have anything to do. And it was me and my one friend Jake of Jake's Game. And it was a very interesting encounter because the first time we were both kind of very neutral, very okay with doing whatever it took. And he was a swashbuckler, a tabaxi swashbuckler rogue. And we had a competition going on of who could be the better thief. That was sort of the ongoing. Obviously, as a rogue, he would be a better thief than me. But that was an ongoing competition we had. And in the first encounter, we encountered a unicorn randomly. And the DM treated a unicorn more like a horse in real life, rather than the fact that they have telepathy and they could talk and do all this kind of stuff, and have healing abilities. So when we were trying to leave the unicorn's grove, we went on either side of it, and he treated it like a horse and said, well, a horse would get spooked, think you're trying to surround it, so it attacked us. We didn't want to attack it, but we ended up defeating the unicorn. And funny enough, I think when 2 people defeat a unicorn, it puts you at level 3 from level 1. So this was a campaign. It was a very interesting experience for me as a player, because the DM let us do whatever we wanted. If we said, oh man, it would be really cool if we could do this, the DM would just give us whatever we wanted. Like, it'd be cool if we could find this magic item. Oh yeah, you can. Here it is. Okay. So it was an interesting experience for me to have a DM just anytime you suggested, like, and it'd be cool if we could do this, it would either happen, show up, or be handed to us on a silver platter, which proved to me as a DM and a player, you don't want to get everything you want just to get it. You want to have to work for it, because you have no sense of fulfillment if you just are given whatever you want. So that was definitely an eye-opener for me. But eventually, we made it to the end of the game, and because he had given us whatever we wanted magic item-wise, we just wiped the floor with the final bosses and Storm King's Thunder and just waltzed right through it. So that's when that campaign ended. It only took like 10 episodes, I think, to finish that. Next up, you can see here is Gryff Endor. So Curse of Strahd had come out. We really wanted to play Curse of Strahd after we finished. I really wanted to play Curse of Strahd, rather, after we had finished Storm King's Thunder. And Jake said he would run it because I'm a huge Castlevania fan, as I've stated before. Dracula, vampires, I wanted to play. So I made a character. And Jake had some really funky stat rolling rules. And you can check out Curse of Strahd Campaign 1, like the Session 0 on this channel. And you can see how Jake kind of just tormented us with these stat rolls. And my character had really, really bad ability score rolls, and it didn't help that Jake's funky rules made me re-roll like the highest one that I had. So my character's name originally was Grim Stats, because he had very disappointing ability scores. And I decided that I wanted to play a lawful good character that I'd never played before. And I wanted to play a Devotion Paladin because I was metagaming in that the immunity to Charm Aura would be very useful in dealing with vampires. And, I said I wanted to be an Aasimar because an Aasimar, at that point, we didn't have... Yeah, at this point, we didn't have... Maybe I'm mixing up the order of some of these games, but at this point, we didn't have Volo's Guide to Monsters. We only had the Aasimar as it was contained in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So that's what I was originally playing. And I was like, okay, well, this one gets resistance to necrotic damage. That'll be helpful. Daylight will be useful. And then eventually, as we were going through, they released Volo's Guide to Monsters, and I ended up choosing the Protector Aasimar, the one that gets the wings. But this character's backstory was he used to be a pirate. And I think his ship was beset by vampires, and he was kind of fighting back to try and survive, and he basically barely managed to make it through till sunrise. And because he remembers very vividly the sun rising over the horizon and driving back these evil creatures, it was at that moment that he devoted himself to Lathander, the Morning Lord, god of sun and all of that, and changed from being a pirate to a paladin. And the only thing he was able to use to fight them off was a piece of the anchor chain. And that was his chosen weapon, which, again, being a fan of Castlevania, I treated it like a whip, right? A chain whip. And the DM let me make it a whip that did a D6 as opposed to a D4. So, whip and shield. I was super pumped about this character. We had a really great thing going. We had... So at some point, someone named their character, I think Pat was a druid. He named his character Angus Ravenclaw. And then, he didn't think that of the Hogwarts Harry Potter connection. And then very quickly, we all renamed our characters to be Harry Potter themed. So we had Gryff Endor, Sassy Slytherin, Knick-Knack Hufflepuffer, and Angus Ravenclaw. And we called ourselves Team... Oh, and my character had a best buddy from Paladin school named Neville Longbottom. So we had we called ourselves Team Hogwarts, and that was sort of our whole thing. But we had a really good storyline going, right? Because we had we were going to try to save Irina from Strahd, and we had encountered basically on like the first night Strahd was trying to sneak into the mansion that we were staying in, and someone fell for his. There was like undead out there, and I drove off the undead as the Paladin. And then it was somebody else's watch, and they were charmed by Strahd and let him inside. And we had this like epic battle at level like 2 or 3 in the hallway, like trying to fight Strahd, trying to beat him back. And he just wiped the floor with us and took Irina. So we were like super pissed. We had this really great thing where like he was plaguing us. We really hated him. And we went to Old Bone Grinder, and again, if you're unfamiliar, I guess spoiler alert, the windmill in there. And, you know, I guess it specifically states in the book that there's a raven on a branch that can talk and tells you to beware. And as we were heading up, we know that we're in a place called Ravenloft. And in my mind, as I'm like, okay, ravens must be bad. I'm thinking like the birds from you know, the Fellowship of the Ring that Saruman sends, and I'm like, he's got to have spies with the ravens. So I spot this raven 120 feet away before we get close to the windmill, and I'm like, I'm gonna throw a javelin at the raven, and I'm at disadvantage because I'm at the extent of my long range, and I roll double natural 20s with disadvantage. Kill this raven. We never get the warning. We go inside. All right, everybody's freaking out. This is a little bit scary. I use Divine Sense and sense that there are 4 fiends in this room. And Angus Ravenclaw, our druid, transforms into a dire wolf and unleashes like a howl as loud as he could, alerting everyone that we were there. And in his mind, he thought that fiends only meant like imps and like weak lesser things, not 3 night hags and whatever else was in the room. And they completely destroyed us. And that is how Gryff Endor died at a TPK in 2017. During that time period, HasCon was a thing. So if you don't remember that, it was only happening in 2017, and Hasbro held their own convention. And I went there on a media badge, and they had all sorts of exclusive gear there. They had like that's where they had the Magic the Gathering cards that had like the Dungeons and Dragons Magic the Gathering cards. They had like the special My Little Pony D&D dice, and that was actually like the weekend that they launched Tomb of Annihilation. And they had the Tomb of Annihilation dice and all this other kind of stuff there. And I'd gotten all of that as part of like the D&D package that I'd signed up for. And I had paid to have basically either Jeremy Crawford or Mike Merles run a game for me. And like I got to play into it pretty early on before things came out. And I was going to possibly get a chance to make a character from Xanathar's Guide before Xanathar's was like available to the public. I was super excited for it. So I made a Yuan-ti because I realized we were going into Chult and there was going to be poisons and stuff. So I made a Yuan-ti wizard, and I thought it would be good to be a necromancer because I would be able to control the undead eventually. And this was this character. I named him Sset because I'm real original, with, you know, S-S-E-T. And basically I only played that character pretty much for that weekend while I was there at HasCon. We played in like 2 games, and fun fact, we didn't get to make characters from Xanathar's Guide. And we never got our game run by Jeremy Crawford or Mike Burles. They just screwed up the time slot and it never happened. So even though we paid to have that, it just never happened. HasCon was a poorly run convention in some aspects, and I gave very serious feedback to the people running it. Like I sat down and went and met with them to talk about what they needed to update. And lo and behold, it's 2020 and we haven't had a HasCon since. It was an absolute blast of a convention. I loved it. The D&D side was managed very poorly, but yeah. Anyway, so that was Set. He just kind of went on hiatus because I never played him again in the Adventures League. And then there was Bimwarryn Fimblegimble Double Lock, which we decided we were really bummed that we never finished Curse of Strahd. So we said to Jake, hey Jake, what if we tried it again with new characters? What do you think? He said, you get one more shot. Everybody can make new characters. We'll start at level 5. You get one shot to try and beat it. If you die again, we're never doing it. So at this point, the Artificer had come out as a secondary one. So there was the original couple ones, and this is the newest one that came out with like the Gunsmith and the Artillerist, the one that threw the bombs. And I was like, oh man, that'd be fun. I always liked the concept of new classes. That's why I tried playing the Blood Hunter. So I said, let me do this. I'll be the Alchemist so I can throw bombs. And I decided to be a Sverfneblin, a rock or a deep gnome, so that I'd have decent bonuses. And it all just kind of worked well. And I built this character to be a, I guess Sset, the Yuan-ti character. I didn't build a backstory. He was Adventurers League. Bimwarryn Fimblegimble Double Lock, though, my Sverfneblin gnome, that name came from like random name generators, and we just were all laughing at the different names, and that just kind of came smushed together. His story was he was part of the City Watch of Blingdenstone, and he dealt with all of the different drow incursions and came to the surface to aid, the people, King Brunner and everybody in fighting off the drow up in the north. Because I had just read all the Drizzt books at that point, so that was very fresh in my mind. And he was just a traveler, because he was always looking to do whatever he could to make himself better and learn more about, mechanical stuff. So that's how he ended up getting pulled into a tournament. And then we eventually got taken to Barovia, and then we kind of played through the rest of the game. That's where I also kind of learned that the Alchemist Artificer was just really bad, because all of your abilities were save or no damage. So if you threw like your bombs and that was your action, and then they made the saving throw, you didn't do anything, no damage. So we ended up playing that. I played that character till the end of the campaign. We managed to defeat Strahd in a cool little story fashion that the DM had come up with. We started at 5, we ended at 8, at level 5, and ended at level 8. But it was a fun ride to be along on. I was kind of pointless in the grand scheme of combat, which was a bummer. But in the long run, still a very fun time. And again, we completed that campaign. So it ended. Then I've been pretty much running my online game in my homebrew world ever since. The party they're going to be playing in this upcoming week, episode number 96. So we've been doing that. But, Jake, of Jake Game and Curse of Strahd, had always talked about from the beginning running an evil campaign. He thought that would be really fun, where all the players are evil and we're trying to deal with fighting good guys. And he had this whole story written up. And I said, Jake, it was a lot of fun when we used to play Jake Game. If you wanted to run an evil campaign, what do you say? I'll run my campaign 3 weeks out of the month, and the last Tuesday of every month, you run your evil campaign. And everybody really loved the concept of that. And we started at level 1. And Jake said, everybody can have a feat at first level, and you roll your stats. So I rolled pretty well. And I chose to be a Whispers Bard, because I like Bard. And everybody was telling me about how underpowered and useless the Whispers Bard is, because their whole Psychic Blades ability uses your Bardic Inspiration, and it doesn't help your party out at all. And that's dumb, because you're wasting your Bardic Inspiration to deal extra damage, and you should be using it to help the party. Well, I said, if I'm a villain and an evil character, I don't necessarily want to help my party, so I can be selfish in using the Bardic Inspiration for me. Let's give that a shot. So then I kind of used that to build a backstory of this Tiefling character, Temerity, who was born to human parents in Waterdeep, and his parents they were kind of alchemist-y types, and they ended up having something happen. They passed away, him and his brothers and sister, his brother and sister, who were both human, were put into an orphanage, and it's a very tragic story. because I wanted to have him be... I wanted to explain why he was evil and why he came to be an evil character. And again, if you look at my Whispers villain character build that's on the channel, that's this character. And I kind of go in to explain that backstory as well. Yeah, long story short for him, he ended up inheriting a business, and he was doing kind of one thing up front, and it was a fence for another like shady business in the back. He got married, and he was living a happy life, and then one night he ended up waking up in control of his own body, and he ended up he killed his wife while not having control, aware of what was going on, but not in control of his body. And at that point, he basically broke and didn't know why he did what he did, didn't know why someone controlled him, didn't know why they gave him control of his body back the second she was dead. No understanding of why. So he has been traveling the world trying to get stronger so he can figure out what did that to his wife so he can stop it and torture it and make it hurt for making him hurt. But because of that, he's chaotic evil, because he was doing, living the best life that he wanted, and then it was all taken from him. So nothing is off the table for whatever he wants. He's going to do whatever he wants. And I really like this character a lot because he is evil, but he's not just like evil for the sake of being evil. He has a reason why he ended up becoming who he is. And in theory, if someone were to return his wife to him, like somehow, he would probably stop being evil or stop doing what he's been doing and just go live his life with his wife. He'd have to come to terms to deal with all of the evil things he's done in his past up until this point. But I kind of like that concept. I'm not going to call him redeemable, because I don't think the stuff that he has done is redeemable. But like, he's evil because he has like essentially nothing left to lose. And he wants to find a way, if he has to, go to shady people or do whatever he can to get stronger so he can find whatever took his wife from him and make it pay. I really like that character a lot. And that game has kind of been on pause due to basically the coronavirus. And it also was because Pat, his character, had the one that he'd been playing for the majority of us, ended up dying. We introduced a new character, and then the coronavirus hit, and we didn't want to play. Then Pat was having trouble getting streaming setups, and then ended up kind of dropping out of the games entirely. So we originally didn't want to play without him here because we just introduced his new character. But now that he's kind of dropped out of the streaming completely, and we're eventually going to start transitioning back to playing in person, we're going to bring that back. So that was been on hiatus since about February, March, and that's going to be coming back. And then lastly down here is Lagwyn. So my good friend Jordan, with the silent PH in the middle, asked me if I wanted to play in a game and also run it on my channel, because he was going through the process of updating the 2nd edition adventure, Rod of 7 Parts, to 5th edition, and he thought it would be really fun, and he wanted me to play, and he was going to bring in a couple other people, and he asked me to see if I had anyone I wanted to bring in. And we slotted that at 8:30 p.m. Eastern on Wednesdays on Twitch. And, he said, let's play, everybody, figure out how you want to build your characters. And at this point, I was like, oh, man, I finally get to play the rogue, right? And nope, someone was already a rogue. So no dice on that again. I should have pointed out when we were going to do the Curse of Strahd, my sister decided to play a rogue. And with the evil game, I just really like the concept of the Whispers Bard villain character, so rogue was kind of off the table. I might multi-class into rogue, possibly. But anyway. So someone was already playing a rogue, and then I knew someone was going to be a wizard, and the other person was going to be a warlock. And I said, oh man, we have no strength, no physical strength. We have no real healing. It's a celestial warlock, so there's a little healing. We have no healing, and we have no tank. We really, what we really need? Paladin. That's like the perfect combination. That's going to be physical strength, that's going to be tanking, that's going to be HP, and it's got healing. That's the ideal thing for this group. And I was just like, I played a lot of Paladins. I don't really think I want to play a Paladin. And I was like, I could be a Barbarian, but I don't really like the Barbarians that much. Oh, and Unearthed Arcana was off the table. So it was only published sources and only like pretty much like Sword Coast sources, so not even like Eberron as an option. So that kind of really limited me in what I wanted to do. And I was like, you know what? I think Bladesinger could be fun. It would be really interesting to be a tank, but tanking by avoidance, by like them not being able to hit me. Like I'm taking the hits. They can't, or I'm absorbing what would be a hit to my party member. The enemies can't actually hit me because my AC will be so high, but they'll be wasting their attacks on me. And I had realized, early on that the Bladesinger is pretty much treated like a Jedi if you read the lore. And the DM said we could get one rare weapon of our choice, or one rare magic item, or 2 uncommon magic items. And I said, you know what? I want a Sunblade. And then I really just kind of embraced this whole my character is a Jedi vibe. I started a first level in Fighter because, mechanically I wanted the extra hit points and Constitution saving throws as well as dueling fighting style so that I could have more damage with my lightsaber or my Sunblade. And this game is ongoing. We're playing every Wednesday. My character's backstory is that he used to be a merchant, and he used the failed merchant background from Acquisitions Incorporated. So he failed as an apothecary potion maker, and then he tried his hand at being like a bodyguard or a fighter. And that didn't work out well. So he did a little bit of that. And then he ended up going back to his elven roots to study with the elves. And that's where he eventually found a Bladesinger and became a Bladesinger. And that was interesting because he's pretty old. He's in his 200s or so. So he's been around on the world for a while, but he's still only level 9 now. We started at level 5. We're now level 9. And we're in the process of, accumulating all of these different, parts of this rod. And it's very interesting to me because it's worked out pretty much as I had planned. Like my AC is regularly 23 to 28. And unless I get critically hit, the DM pretty much can't hit me. And then I have a familiar that's also potentially absorbing attacks. With a Mastermind Rogue, I can get advantage. My character has Elven Accuracy. So I have a pretty good chance of striking often. But, it's a fun and interesting character. I like it a lot. I like the lore of the kind of Jedi vibe. I took spells that sort of simulate Jedi abilities, which I thought was really fun, rather than like standard like Fireball. I don't have Fireball, but I have Lightning Bolt for Force Lightning. So I kind of worked it that way, and I thought that was really an interesting choice in building this character. So again, I really, really enjoy playing this character a lot. It is really my only character that I have that I'm playing consistently as well. So that is also part of the, part of the reason. But yeah, it's just fun to do that. And again, I realize this video is about an hour long, and I kind of knew it would be because people wanted me to talk about all of my characters. And I didn't see a point in making piecemeal videos for this. I thought it just kind of made sense to just start and go till I finished all of them. But that's all of the characters that I've played in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. 3 of them were half-elves, 2 of them were humans. The other ones were kind of a mix mash. One of them TPK'd, so it doesn't even really count. And 2 of them, the Yuan-ti wizard and the elf bard cleric are pretty much adventure league characters that I've never revisited. And most of the other ones are all in campaigns that have pretty much finished. And then, again, I have my evil game character, which will hopefully be back at the end of September for a return to that game. And then my ongoing Bladesinger, and I don't have anything else going on. So, that's the frame of reference of what I have for my knowledge of playing in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. So hopefully that helps give you a mindset into me and like something behind some of my characters. And if you have more questions or more specific stuff you'd like to know about those characters, leave it in the comments and I will gladly answer any specific questions you might have. But that way, hopefully it'll give you a better understanding when you hear me talking about fixing things or adjusting things, where my frame of mind is and my frame of reference of characters in 5th edition is. So thank you all so much for watching. Thank you to my patrons over on Patreon for continuing to support me and the channel. If you haven't subscribed already, I would really appreciate it if you did so. I'll see you all next time.